Welcome to Accommodate This. In July of 2025, Princeton University published a study that reveals autism may have 4 separate subtypes. Now, I saw this study at that time, but I held off making a video about it because I wanted to wait until more peer studies had occurred to either verify or discredit these findings before I talked about them. Well, additional studies have taken place, and they've reached the same conclusions. So let's talk about it. So Princeton used autism test results and DNA test data to identify any trends between 5,392 autistic children between ages 4 and 18. The average age was 8.5. They also compared test results and DNA of 1,972 of their non-autistic siblings who acted as control subjects. Then they took all of that data and ran it through AI, which was able to quickly identify trends among 241 features. That's about 238 traits and 2 covariates. And the result was 4 clear subtypes of autism. Now, I had mentioned that peer studies were important, so they compared their findings to the records of 6,393 individuals from the Simons Foundation Powering Autism Research for Knowledge, or SPARK, which includes autistic individuals living in the US with a professional diagnosis. They also included data from the Simons Simplex Collection, or SSC, which is similar to SPARK, but focused solely on families with only one autistic family member. So since data was captured differently between Princeton and Simons, they were only able to compare 108 features, but the results were the same. There are 4 distinct subtypes for autism. Now, just to make absolutely sure there were 4, because there could be more, they tried organizing the data across fewer subtypes. However, that tended to show lots of variation within one or more subtypes, suggesting the need for an additional subtype. And when they tried more subtypes, there was a lot of overlap between them, suggesting fewer subtypes were needed. Therefore, at this time, a 4-subtype model makes the most sense. But I just had to throw that out there, that there may be additional distinctions made in the future. And I know you're probably dying for me to go over these 4 categories, so let's do that now. First, we have the social and behavioral challenges subtype. There were about 1,976 participants who fell into this category. That's about 37% of participants. If I were part of the test, this is likely the subtype I would fall into as well. Do with that what you will. The social and behavioral challenges subtype has all the core autistic traits, such as social and communication difficulties and restricted or repetitive behaviors. At the same time, they still reached all the developmental milestones as non-autistic children. There were no delays. Individuals in this subtype often experience co-occurring conditions such as ADHD, anxiety, depression, or OCD. As for myself, I suspect a little ADHD. I definitely have anxiety, and I've been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. Depression is a regular occurrence for me, and I can be a bit OCD at times. But I probably don't have the actual disorder. Again, do with that what you will. Another interesting feature of this subtype is that symptoms of autism tend to become more prominent later in life. I was diagnosed at age 44, so I definitely fit that criteria. But many late diagnosed autistics are likely to fall into this subtype. And the interesting thing about that is, it's not necessarily because we were ignored, neglected, or not identified due to any fault of anyone. Knowing that our traits tend to worsen as we age takes away some of that guilt that families can feel about their autistic family members who are late diagnosed. And that's not to say we didn't have any traits until a later age, but more that the challenges we face worsen as we age. Social quirks during childhood can become barriers to employment, for example, and they've charted this. The social and behavioral challenges subtype follows a developmental pattern they called trans-up, which shows normal development early in life, followed by a huge dip in adulthood compared to their non-autistic peers. But another fascinating part about all of this is mostly due to gene expression. In other words, the variations in our genes were almost dormant. Not the best word, but it illustrates my point. They were almost dormant until they suddenly turned on or expressed later in life. And that results in exciting our neurons differently than during childhood. I guess the biggest takeaway from this is it's not your fault, and you aren't making it up. Many late diagnosed autistics can feel like we've lost abilities. We struggle to understand why we suddenly are having issues when we seem to be able to handle more, or were more resilient before, and so on. And we are very aware that the perspective is that we appear like we've completely lost it. We've been broken somehow. And because we were able to do things before, we beat ourselves up thinking we just need to push ourselves harder, focus more, or try harder to get that back. But this shows it is down to the genetic level. We aren't making it up. We don't need to push ourselves to another breaking point because this is part of our natural, normal, autistic development. It is real. It's nobody's fault, and we don't need to beat ourselves up about it. I think that's great. Okay, the next subtype is called mixed ASD with developmental delay. There were 1,002 participants in this subtype, which accounts for about 19%. Individuals in this subtype still had all the core autistic traits and had developmental delays, so they met developmental milestones later than their non-autistic peers. Individuals in this subtype usually do not experience any co-occurring conditions. They tended to have the opposite developmental pattern from the first group, which is delays during childhood, but they catch up to their non-autistic peers later in life. Researchers called this the trans-down pattern. These individuals may be identified autistic early in life, but appear to grow out of it. This contributes to the theory that autism can be treated or cured. Now, the fact remains they're still autistic. However, they have been able to develop strategies and coping mechanisms allowing them to function in their environment. The great part about all of this is, while both sides of the issue were fighting one another, the real answer was in front of us the whole time. You're both right. Some autistics appear to get better. Not cured, but better than they were. And some don't. Nobody was making it up or lying. We were just limited by our exposure to the data. And this developmental pattern was tracked down to the genetic level as well, where gene expression was turned off later in life. This is fascinating because it underscores the spectrum aspect of autism and how a single diagnosis isn't really helpful. What's more helpful is understanding the support needs of the individual, and individuals in this category may still need some support, but for the most part, their traits and needs are mixed. That's why they're known as the mixed subtype. This is so fascinating. The third subtype is known as the moderate challenges subtype. With 1,860 participants in this category, it's the second largest, accounting for 34% of study participants. Individuals in this category still have autistic traits, but they are considered mild by comparison to the other subtypes. They also tend to meet developmental milestones on time with no delays, and usually do not experience co-occurring conditions. Now, when they looked at the genes of individuals in this category, they found that the genes that would have high impact on their autistic traits were less likely to show variance, and genes that are less likely to have an impact showed a lot of variation. The developmental pattern for this subtype is called up, as the line of development tends to have little to no impact compared to their non-autistic peers. Now, that's not to say that nobody in this category will not need any supports. They will likely need supports if they've received a diagnosis, but the amount of support they will need will be low. The fourth and final subtype is known as the broadly affected subtype. This is the smallest subtype with only 554 participants, or roughly 10% falling into this category. This is what many people today refer to as severe autism. They not only have the standard autistic traits, but they experience extreme and wide-ranging challenges, including developmental delays, social and communication difficulties, repetitive behaviors, and co-occurring conditions like anxiety, depression, and mood dysregulation. Now, when you look at their genes, they tend to have lots of variation among high-impact genes, and their development is broadly affected across all developmental stages. They have what is called a down developmental pattern, which may start strong but experiences a huge dip early in life. This may contribute to what some families report as their child being perfectly normal and then suddenly becoming autistic. And this often occurs around the 18 to 24 month mark, which coincides with the early vaccine schedules. And that makes it easy for people to reach the incorrect conclusion that vaccines cause autism. In reality, it's their gene expression which turns on around the same time, whether vaccinated or not. Now, vaccines have nothing to do with it at all. It's all genetics. This alone is huge because it gets us even closer to finally settling the argument around vaccines and underscores what scientists have been saying all along. Vaccines do not cause autism. And that brings me to my final point. Correlation is not causation. Coincidence is not enough to prove anything, one way or another. When it comes to these four subtypes, they didn't simply run the data through AI once and then went with the first result. They analyzed and reanalyzed the data over and over again. These subtypes are not simply four ways they arbitrarily decided to group the data. About 88 to 96% of the time, a data element was analyzed across the entire panel of participants. Solid distinctions were identified that divided the same participants into the same four categories. And this includes whether they looked at development cycles, gene variations, gene expressions, the timing of each expression, specific behaviors, or other traits. And while the standard autistic traits of communication deficits and restricted or repetitive behaviors were observed in all four categories, severity of those traits still fell into those four subtypes. And this shows that the classification assignments are pretty stable. So, to summarize, autism is a highly genetic disorder that is highly predicated on gene expression. Those genes may be expressed at different times during human development. There are predictable patterns to when those expressions will occur. And subtypes can help us better identify areas of support and inform the development of more targeted treatment plans. The spectrum is less blurry than ever before. Autism is not caused by bad parenting or vaccines. If anything, these conclusions eliminate more guilt experienced by the parents and families of autistic individuals and invite more compassion for autistic individuals and their loved ones. To me, this study provides so much hope for the future. We not only have better support options to look forward to, but a better world for us all. And this study validates our experiences, whether you are autistic or you know an autistic person and have watched them change over the years. It underscores the importance of not passing judgment on the autistic person who is trying their hardest to fit in and live their best life, as well as yourself and the other people around them who worry or experience guilt for the roles they play in that autistic person's life. This study has made autism a little less mysterious and shows it's not something to be afraid of, but rather is a normal variation of human development. And just like everyone else, autistic people deserve understanding and respect. I hope you found this video informative and inspiring. Please leave a comment and tell me your thoughts on this study. What's your interpretation of the data? Let's continue the discussion below, and until next time, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please comment, like, and subscribe to see more content like this, or click on the video here to continue watching.